The phone buzzed, but it wasn't Everin. It was Dad. My breath hitched. I'd expected a scream, a slammed door, anything but this chilling, surgical silence. Everin hadn't just left. He detonated a bomb in the one place I thought was unbreachable, my relationship with my father, and I had handed him the detonator. The silence in our apartment wasn't peaceful. It was a tactical, weaponized void, and for 72 agonizing hours, Everin had been wielding it with the devastating precision of a master. The air, usually filled with his soft humming or the low thrum of a documentary, was now thick and suffocating, a pressurized cabin waiting for a breach. Every sound was magnified, the glacial hum of the high-end refrigerator, the whisper of my silk blouse against my skin as I paced, the almost imperceptible click of his jaw as he ate his toast this morning, staring at a fixed point on the wall just past my head. It had started, as these deep freezes often did, with something I considered trivial, a light jab, a playful critique. He'd brought home his latest artistic acquisition, a tangled sculpture of rebar and rusted gears he'd proudly named Urban Phoenix. I'd laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that was second nature in my line of work. Looks like it lost a fight with a garbage truck, babe, I'd quipped, expecting him to roll his eyes and banter back. He hadn't. The light in his eyes just switched off. He didn't argue. He just retreated into this impenetrable quiet. I'm a PR executive. I manage perceptions for a living. In my world, silence is a vacuum, a dangerous void you fill immediately before an opponent fills it with a narrative you don't control. And for 3 days, I had been losing control of the narrative in my own home. This wasn't the companionable silence we once shared, curled up on the sofa reading. This was a statement. A punishment. 2 years ago, I'd fallen for Everin's gentleness. He was the calm harbor to my perpetual storm, a man whose steadiness felt like an anchor in the choppy waters of my career. He could absorb my stress after a brutal day of crisis management, his quiet presence a balm. But in moments like this, when I felt unheard and deliberately ignored, that same gentleness curdled in my mind. It looked suspiciously like weakness, a passive-aggressive fortress designed to frustrate me into submission. My father, a man who built a shipping empire on handshakes of steel and a zero-tolerance policy for what he called emotional indulgence, would have called Everin's retreat a catastrophic failure of nerve. Feelings are liabilities, Naira, he'd always say. Assets and actions are all that matter. Everin knew how much that philosophy was etched into my DNA, and I knew his deepest wound. I knew it with the chilling clarity of a shared, intimate secret. One night, months ago, on our balcony under the soft glow of the string lights, he'd told me about his childhood. His voice, usually so measured, was uncharacteristically fragile, as he described how any display of sadness or frustration was met with ridicule from his brothers and weary dismissal from his parents. They'd called him dramatic, told him to stop making a fuss over nothing, effectively erasing his emotional reality. It was his absolute red line, the one place he had asked me implicitly never to go. I had held him while he told me, promising him I understood. But right now, trapped in this maddening quiet, that sacred confidence felt less like a vulnerability to be protected and more like an inconvenient excuse for his infuriating withdrawal. The silence had to break, and I knew exactly which lever to pull to make it shatter. The third night was the breaking point. My patience, a notoriously finite resource, had evaporated. I was sitting on the edge of our ridiculously expensive velvet sofa, a glass of Chardonnay sweating in my hand, watching him. Everin was at the dining table, bathed in the warm pool of a single pendant light, headphones on, completely absorbed in sketching in his notepad. He looked serene, an island of infuriating calm in the middle of the storm I was brewing inside. He wasn't just ignoring me. He was demonstrating, with painstaking artistry, that he could exist peacefully without me. That his world, his happiness, wasn't contingent on mine. It felt like the ultimate betrayal. I needed a reaction, any reaction, a shout, a slammed door, tears. I could work with any of those. I could manage anger, soothe tears. What I couldn't manage was this placid nullity. It was a power play, and he was winning. My entire career was built on breaking through noise and apathy, on forcing a response. A jolt to the system was needed, a controlled demolition to clear the way for rebuilding. At least that's the professional, sanitized version I told myself. The truth was uglier. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted to puncture that serene bubble and see him flinch, to prove I could still affect him, that I still held that power. My phone felt heavy and dangerous in my hand. A text was too impersonal, too easy to ignore. A voice carries tone, contempt, the unmistakable texture of intent. I opened our chat, my thumb hovering over the microphone icon. My heart was pounding, a mix of adrenaline and something sour I refused to name. I leaned in, as if sharing a secret, and pressed record. My voice came out as a low, venomous whisper, each word crafted to be a precision strike against the insecurity he had so trustingly laid bare for me. Are you just going to be a coward about this? Honestly, Evren, I purred, the cruelty coding every syllable, you're just an emotional little bitch who can't handle one tiny disagreement. I hit send. A wave of sick, triumphant pleasure washed over me. It was done. I leaned back, taking a slow sip of my wine, my eyes fixed on him. Now we wait for the explosion. I pictured him ripping the headphones off, his face a mask of disbelief and hurt. He would finally get angry, he would yell. And then, when the anger subsided, the hurt would turn to a desperate need for reconciliation. He would crumble, and I would be there to pick up the pieces magnanimously, and we could finally move past this. The silence was broken, I had won, but the explosion never came. There was no satisfying crack of his composure, no dramatic ripping off of headphones. Instead, there was something far more unnerving. He simply stopped sketching. For a long, drawn-out moment, he remained perfectly still. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion that felt heavy with finality, he lifted the headphones from his ears and placed them carefully on the table. He looked at his phone, his screen illuminating his face. His expression didn't change as he listened to my vitriolic whisper fill the space between us. When it was over, he looked up at me, and the man looking back at me was a stranger. All the warmth, the softness, the gentle understanding I had taken for granted was gone. It had been replaced by a terrifying, glacial calm. There was no anger in his eyes, no hurt, there was just assessment. It was the detached, impersonal look a doctor might give a terminal diagnosis or an engineer might give a structure that had failed a stress test. It was a look of pure, unadulterated finality. He had seen the data and he was closing the file. Without breaking eye contact, he picked up his phone again. His thumbs moved with an unhurried, chilling efficiency across the keyboard. I watched, my triumphant smirk now frozen on my face, a knot of ice forming in my stomach. What was he doing? Typing a long, angry paragraph, deleting my photos, then my own phone buzzed on the sofa beside me. The sound was unnaturally loud in the silent room. I glanced down, expecting to see his name. It wasn't him. The notification on my lock screen read, Dad asterisk asterisk. A jolt of pure, unadulterated panic shot through me. Why was my father texting me at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday? He never texted unless it was an emergency. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the phone, and there it was, a forwarded message. My own voice message sitting there in a neat purple audio bubble. Beneath it, a single line of text from Evren sent to my father. Naira said she was working on her empathy, seems to be going well. The air left my lungs in a single silent gasp. The room tilted, the walls seemed to be closing in. In that one horrifying moment, I understood. He hadn't just fought back, he hadn't just gotten angry. He had taken my grenade, walked past me without a word, and detonated it in the one place he knew would cause absolute systemic annihilation. My relationship with my father. My first instinct was to fix it, to manage the crisis. I scrambled to call Everin, my fingers fumbling on the screen. The call didn't even ring once. It went straight to a recorded message. The person you are trying to reach is not accepting calls at this time. Blocked. I switched to iMessage, my thumbs flying as I typed a frantic, incoherent string of wait, I'm sorry, let's talk. The blue bubbles turned a sickening green. Not delivered. Blocked there too. Every digital door had been slammed and bolted in a matter of seconds. The speed of it was breathtaking, clinical. Just as the full weight of my digital exile began to crush me, my phone lit up with an incoming call. Dad asterisk asterisk. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I answered, trying to assemble a calm, professional voice from the wreckage of my panic. Dad. Hey, what's up? His voice was not the booming, angry tirade I had braced myself for. It was worse. It was quiet, measured, and steeped in a disappointment so profound it felt like a physical blow. Naira, he began, and the sound of my own name felt alien in his mouth. I don't even know what to say. Dad, it was a stupid fight. I was angry. I didn't mean it. Don't, he cut me off, the single word sharp as glass. Don't you dare try to manage this with me. Evren just forwarded me a series of emails. Detailed emails, Naira, with screenshots, timestamps. The trip you refused to go on for his mother's 60th because you had a networking event, which he points out was actually just drinks with your junior staff. The times you've belittled his art in front of your friends, the jokes you make at his expense. There was a pause, and I could hear him take a heavy breath. He documented 2 years of loving you, and he documented how you treated that love. And it ends with a voice message of you calling him that. Is this who you are, Naira? Is this the person I raised? I had no answer. I was speechless, drowning in the icy water of exposure. I am ashamed, he said, the words landing with the finality of a judge's gavel. Deeply ashamed. He hung up, the dial tone buzzed in my ear. I felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't yelled. He had simply reevaluated me just like Evren. I had been weighed, measured, and found wanting by the two most important men in my life. Desperate for an ally, for someone to tell me this was all a huge overreaction, I called my best friend, Chloe. I sobbed the story out to her, framing it as Evren's insane, disproportionate act of revenge. Chloe listened patiently. When I was done, her response wasn't the soothing comfort I craved. It was a bucket of cold, hard reality. Wow, she said, her voice devoid of sympathy. So you finally did it. You took his deepest, most painful insecurity, the one thing he trusted you with, and you weaponized it to win a stupid fight. And now you're shocked that he nuked you from orbit? What did you expect, Naira? A thank you card? He didn't just leave you, he taught you that your actions have consequences beyond your own little bubble. Your support system didn't just collapse, you dynamited the foundations yourself. The days that followed were a waking nightmare, a masterclass in consequences I never thought I'd have to attend. I existed in a state of suspended panic, my body humming with a low-grade, constant dread. My phone became an instrument of torture. I'd check it obsessively, my thumb swiping down to refresh my email every 30 seconds, convinced I was feeling phantom vibrations in my pocket. At work, where I was paid to be the epitome of calm control, I was a wreck. I'd stare at a press release, the words blurring into meaningless shapes, my mind replaying the cold, clipped finality in my father's voice. I am ashamed. My first concrete action was a desperate pilgrimage to our apartment. I drove there in a haze, rehearsing speeches in my head, some tearful and apologetic, others indignant and accusatory. When I arrived, the doorman, a friendly man who used to save Evren's packages, wouldn't meet my eye. Sorry, Miss Sharma, he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the marble floor. I have instructions. My keycard was denied at the elevator. Humiliation washed over me, hot and prickly. Forced to use the intercom, I buzzed our apartment, silence. I buzzed again and again. Finally, I rode the service elevator to our floor and walked to our door. My own key, the one on a ring with my office and car keys, slid into the lock but wouldn't turn. It was a solid metallic refusal. They'd already changed it. Taped to the polished wood of the door was a single, crisply folded sheet of paper from the building's management company. It was a formal notice, stating that as per the primary leaseholder's request, my access rights had been revoked, effective immediately. I pressed my face against the cool glass of the window beside the door. The space was hollowed out. His drafting table, a massive oak piece he'd inherited from his grandfather, was gone. The worn leather armchair where he read was missing. His entire corner, with its stacks of art books and pots of ink, was just empty floor. He hadn't just moved out. He had surgically excised himself from the life we had built, and the speed and efficiency of it were terrifying. My mind became a battlefield. I was caught in a vicious, self-destructive loop. One moment I was consumed by a tidal wave of self-loathing, the sound of my own venomous whisper playing on repeat. Emotional little bitch, my God. I had taken the one vulnerability he had ever shown me, the one piece of his soul he had trusted me to protect, and I had used it like a shiv. But just as the guilt threatened to drown me, a bitter, defensive anger would surge up. How could he be so cruel? I'd rage to myself, pacing my now silent living room. Running to my father, that wasn't just leaving, that was a calculated campaign to destroy my reputation. He knew what he was doing. He was being manipulative with his silence, pushing me, baiting me to do something extreme. This toxic cycle fueled my next move. Late one night, after 2 glasses of wine, I sat at my laptop, determined to write an email that would fix everything. I started by typing, "I am so sorry," but the words felt inadequate. My PR-trained mind immediately began to reframe, to contextualize, to manage. The apology morphed into a dissertation on my own victimhood. I was just so frustrated by the wall you put up, I wrote, my fingers flying. I didn't know how to get through to you, and I lashed out. I know the words were awful, but you have to see how your reaction, involving my family, was completely disproportionate and designed to hurt me in the worst way possible. I read it over. It sounded reasonable, didn't it? It showed I was willing to take some responsibility while also holding him accountable. I hit send. The response, when it came a week later, was not from Evren. I was in a meeting, trying to project an aura of competence, when my phone buzzed. The sender was an unfamiliar name from a prestigious law firm. The subject line read, "Regarding the tenancy and assets of E. Vance and N. Sharma." My blood ran cold. It was a cold, formal, and utterly impersonal email outlining the logistics for dividing our shared assets. It was a legal document, a final closing of accounts. But at the very bottom, below the lawyer's digital signature, was a single, devastating addendum, clearly forwarded from Evren. "I hope, for your own sake, that you one day learn to genuinely respect another person, Naira. Not as an audience for your performance or a project to be managed, but as a human being. Consider this the last lesson I have to offer. Goodbye." 3 months passed. The raw, gaping wound of the breakup scabbed over into a dull, permanent scar. On the surface, my life resumed its familiar shape. I went to work, I led meetings, I secured a major new client. I was, by all external metrics, functioning, but it was a performance. The effortless confidence I once possessed was gone, replaced by a brittle, carefully constructed facade. The silence in my apartment was no longer a weapon wielded by someone else. It was my own personal prison. My relationship with my father never recovered. It was now a thing of strained politeness and unspoken truths. We had Sunday brunch, we talked about the market, we discussed my career, but the warmth was gone. He looked at me differently, with a subtle, persistent disappointment in his eyes. He no longer saw his strong, successful daughter. He saw a stranger, a woman capable of a kind of cruelty he couldn't reconcile with the person he thought he knew. Evren hadn't just broken up with me, he had permanently altered the one relationship I had always considered unshakable. He had held up a mirror, and my father couldn't unsee the reflection. The final, definitive blow came not from a lawyer or a formal notice, but from the casual, indifferent cruelty of social media. I was scrolling aimlessly through Instagram when a photo from Chloe, who still had mutual friends with Evren, popped up on my feed. It was a group shot from a hiking trip in Oregon. There, in the center of a laughing, sun-drenched group of strangers, was Evren. He was tan, his hair was a little longer, and he was smiling. It wasn't the gentle, accommodating smile I knew. It was a wide, unburdened, and genuinely joyous grin. The kind of smile I hadn't seen on his face in a very, very long time. And in that instant, seeing him so completely, so radiantly asterisk-free of me, the last vestiges of my defensive anger crumbled into dust. It was over, irrevocably. He had moved on, not just physically to another city, but emotionally into a new life, one where he wasn't walking on eggshells, one where his joy wasn't contingent on my mood. I finally understood. I had lost. I had taken something beautiful and gentle, and in a single, ugly moment of ego, I had smashed it. The regret was no longer a sharp pain, but a heavy, permanent weight in my chest. I sat there in my silent, perfectly decorated apartment, a monument to my own success, and felt a profound and absolute loneliness. And even then, in the depths of that genuine remorse, a final, pathetic thought wormed its way into my mind. If only he hadn't been so sensitive. If he could have just handled conflict like a man, we wouldn't be here. The thought was fleeting, but its presence was a chilling revelation. It was the last, dying gasp of my own unfixable flaw. I had lost everything, and maybe, just maybe, I hadn't learned a single thing.